I think students have this big fear that an application has to be perfect to get into medical school, when ultimately it just has to be good enough. Mission Accepted, Season 2, Episode 3. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi.
Hello. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm wonderful, recovering from a cold, so my voice is still a little wonky, so I apologize to everyone listening, but we'll get through this. We'll have some fun, and hopefully we'll learn something along the way. Before we jump into looking at your application, I would love to hear your reflection on the application cycle and talk about what you think led to having a successful application cycle when it seems like lots of people in similar situations to you, or maybe even better stats or whatever, didn't get into medical school. What do you think works for you?
Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Natalie. I applied last cycle, so of 2020, 2021. It was definitely rough, especially with COVID. I took the MCAT twice during that cycle, total of 4 times. With it being shortened was another obstacle. Applying with a lot of like burdens with family and financial aid and all that stuff. And I definitely scored lower than what I would like. The only saving grace, I think, was just skills that I took from you from like writing and personal statement and like interviews. But I saw a lot of people with higher stats not getting in, and I was definitely worried for the whole cycle. So a big emphasis on just how you write your story.
Telling your story. Did it come up at all in interviews or talking to people about like, oh my gosh, like the way that you talked about your experiences or how you wrote your personal statement has really got me interested in learning more about you?
Yes, in both of my interviews, I had 2 interviews for 2 DO schools, and they both mentioned my MCAT, which I was dreading. But they all just loved how I wrote about my experiences. They loved the stories. They actually asked me to delve into one of my stories more because they wanted to know like the ending and the outcome. They absolutely were in love with it.
Nice. That's what I love to hear. Just more proof that humans love stories. And apparently one of them was so good that they're like, I need to know how it ended. Like, don't leave me hanging. Which is awesome. So I'm so excited that line of communication, how to communicate through these stories in your activities, personal statement, secondaries, etc. Less so with secondaries, but at least for the primary application, that it really resonated with these reviewers and interviewers. So awesome. Let's dive into your application. We'll take a look. The first thing I love looking at is when did you apply, and you were like a first dayer kind of person, which is awesome. Applying very early on in the process, which apparently you heard through the grapevines that it's important to apply early. Now you did mention getting 2 interviews at 2 osteopathic schools. When it came to applying to AMCAS and ACOMAS for the osteopathic schools, were you able to submit everything kind of same day for both? Did you submit one before the other? How did you kind of time submitting 2 different applications?
So AMCAS was first. That was my priority. I got my score back in July, and it wasn't the score I wanted at all. And I actually restudied again for September. So I actually didn't apply for DO until mid-October. When my September score came out, it was very, very late.
Yeah.
But it worked out. So I was
Okay.
definitely grateful. But yeah, I applied to like 10 DO schools, and then secondaries weren't in until the first week of November.
Wow. And were you
Yeah.
planning on applying to DO schools and just retaking the MCAT kind of took priority to then the application, or was that kind of like with my MCAT score, maybe I should apply to DO schools as well?
It was a lingering thought because I did work with some DO physicians. It definitely wasn't a priority. But then when I saw my MCAT, I was like, I might actually have a better chance with DO schools. So I made sure I looked up their philosophy and schools, locations, like what makes them different. And I actually did fall in love with just everything that they do, the little extra work that they do. So I was really glad that that worked out.
Nice. All right. So let's continue on here in the application, and we get to kind of the first part before grades. We have a disadvantaged essay. And you have here just talking about what happened, right? These are just straight facts. There's no story behind it. There's no let me try to dive into this and make it fancy and anything else. It's like, here's what I went through. Here's the situation, and it's perfect, right? You did what you needed to do. You gave context about your upbringing, about the situations you were put in as a child, and maybe puts context around grades and stats and other things based on where you're coming from. This is a perfect disadvantaged essay. So great job with this.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So we continue on and we get to grades. And we see starting off freshman year 2014-15, and we see good grades, right? A's and B's, nothing huge. We get to junior year, we got that little C in biochemistry, C plus in physiology with anatomy. But overall, looks like pretty decent grades, and we get down to your GPA, and we see that dip junior year where those C's were coming out. But we see overall this cumulative GPA, decent 3.34, not amazing, not outstanding. Cumulative overall 3.5, but we have this post-bac GPA. I wanted to ask about this post-bac GPA. So Cooper Medical School, usually those are SMP programs. Was that an SMP program or an undergraduate post-bac program?
It was an undergraduate post-bac program. Yeah, so it was just a certification, no master's, and then the grade went into my undergraduate GPA.
Nice, perfect. Okay, that was a new one for me. Usually, when we see them tied to the medical schools, those are SMP programs.
Yeah.
So you did 27 credits, 381, 372 science, 40 all other. So you basically said, I'm going to do some more classes. I'm going to show you that I'm capable. What was it that made the switch for you from struggling a little bit, kind of junior year, picking it a little bit back up senior year, but then completely turning around and getting a 3.72, which is the best you did out of all of your years of undergrad? What was that mindset shift for you that finally made it work?
In undergrad, I was definitely trying to just balance everything. Like I wanted to do every single extracurricular activity. I was an RA. I was doing so many things, and I definitely did not put any emphasis on my grades that I should have.
Yeah.
But for the post-bac, I was like, okay, I'm not going to do a lot. I know these grades are important. I'm just going to focus on that. And I was a little bit older, so I was definitely out of the, sorry, the lights just turned off in here. I was under the, just like an older mindset, like, okay, let's just focus, let's settle on one thing at a time. I only did part-time scribing at the time, so I definitely had more time to just focus.
Nice. Very common mistake students make in their undergraduate careers, taking on too much and not putting enough focus on classes, which has the outcome of painting a picture that you're not academically capable, when in reality you are. You're just stretched too thin to be able to focus enough on those grades. So great job having that self-awareness enough to know, like, this is important. Grades are important. Let me focus on that. And you did it, which is great. And then we get to the MCAT. And you mentioned needing to take it twice. You took it twice in 2017. Talk about that timeline.
Yeah, so that was my junior year. I did no research about the MCAT. I knew nothing. Like, even when I applied in that cycle. I didn't do any description, like, for any of my activities. I had no idea what was going through my mind at that time.
Oh, no.
Yes, it was a disaster. But I took it, and I didn't know 490 was terrible. I was like, oh, I'll just do it again in like a 2-month span. Took it again at 491. I was like, I'll just try. So I applied. That didn't work out. And then after my post-bac,
surprising.
Yeah. And then in my post-bac, they actually gave us like an MCAT prep course. And I just learned, like, wow, this test is a lot heavier and dense than I thought it was. So I took about a year or two and really delve into it. to try to get into it. And I have like severe testing anxiety, so that also didn't help.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely took those few years just to know like what the MCAT was.
Yeah. So your third score is not a huge jump from that 491. What did you do differently to get that 5-point increase between the 493 and 498?
During that time, I was actually scoring in the 500s. So I was like completely surprised to see that score. I just did more practice, like UWorld, as many like question banks as I could do. And I was scoring in the 505s and then I got the 498. So there was still like a gap between where I was scoring, but definitely cars was my lowest, which makes sense with like my childhood background of like English and the whole critical thinking. So I used that in my interviews. I told them like, hey, I know the knowledge, I know the sciences. I just have to work on the critical thinking, which is a skill I can develop on. So turned it into a positive.
Interesting. So for me, it's very interesting because the same skills that are needed for the cars section are needed for the other sections. And typically what I see is that, especially with where you just went of like, well, it kind of is expected with my background with English and my childhood. Usually what I see, especially with 126 in ChemPhys, 126 in Biochem, you have the critical thinking necessary. You have the understanding and mastery of the English language. What you don't have is the confidence. And so you get to the car section and you go, this car section, I know that because I'm an ESL student and we didn't speak English in the house, whatever it is, right? That I'm just going to do poorly here. And the whole time you're in the car section, you continue to tell yourself that. And what you're doing is you're distracting yourself from actually doing well in the cars section. And so put it all to rest. You're good enough for the cars section. You just need to tell yourself that as you're going through it. Awesome. So 498, as you applied in May here, right? May 30th, you get this second MCAT score in September. You
Mid-October.
you get your score back mid-October after a September test. You make the decision to keep pushing forward with your application. What was that thought process like?
I'm not really sure. I think I'm just a really resilient person. I think after speaking to my parents, we just decided like it was already like certified my application on MCAS, and I was like, let's just go for it. I think that I made my essays really strong. I think having the post-bac was really strong. So I was hoping that schools, like really holistic schools, would look at my whole application and hopefully didn't like throw out my application just for the score.
Cool. All right. So we pushed forward. We got that DO application in as well, which we talked about earlier. And then we get to your experiences. And so the first one you have on here is shadowing experience from January 2019 to May of 2019. And the thing that I wanted to highlight here is that you have it marked as a most meaningful. Now, typically I tell students, don't mark shadowing as most meaningful because typically all you're doing is saying, I watched doctors do their job and it really impacted my life. And to me, it's just a very kind of a weak kind of story to tell there. Talk about why you wanted to mark this as most meaningful.
I think during this time, I felt really discouraged in my journey. So I felt like getting this experience really helped me just not see patient interaction, but also see just like the medicine side of it, like actually seeing surgeries was really impactful for me because I haven't gotten that close to like a surgery center or like patients. So, and then the doctor also sat down and she spoke with me a lot just about the process and how she got there, and she would take the time to teach me. So that kind of like reignited my fire for sure.
Nice. Okay, good. All right. Yeah, and you definitely talk about it here with this final statement here about the surgery was exhilarating, the compassion demonstrated was inspiring, and the type of patient care I want to provide. So nice little takeaway there. So good job with that. As we continue on, you have your scribe duties here. Obviously, lots of hours over the course of several years. And you did a great job, not just describing, like, here's what a scribe does. Like, everyone knows what a scribe does. But you really,
Yes.
you really do a great job of kind of showing what you were doing, the impact that you had without jumping into just duties, right? The one thing I marked on here is a little bit of a kind of a humble brag of like, the next day, both the physician and PAs commended me for my hard work, and I realized that teamwork is vital. So a little bit of the sales pitchy, little humble bragging there. But the good thing is that it's not the bulk of your activity descriptions, which is where a lot of students go wrong.
Yeah, the showing here is a lot harder than you say it is in your books.
It's much harder. Yeah, the showing for activity descriptions is very hard because there's not a lot of space.
Mhm.
Yes, definitely. I agree with you. You have your mission trip to Guatemala. Good story here, talking about what you did, the impact that you had, and why it was important. Right, this takeaway every day. I think about this person, which motivates me to return to serve the community in any way possible. So nice little takeaway there. And then we get to your mini medical series. And I just wrote a note here that you could have written a better kind of experience name here to really highlight what this is. It's more of a leadership position, because typically when I see mini medical series, what I think about is the student participating, right? These high school students participating in these like mini medical schools or whatever it is. And so that's what I figured it was. And then I started reading the description. I'm like, well, no, you were actually organizing all of this, and kind of being a mentor to these students. And so I think there was a missed opportunity to really highlight the strength of this activity with a better name than just mini medical series. So you could have put like organizer or whatever, the kind of language that you could have used there. So, but overall, good activity to have on there.
Awesome. I definitely agree. That one was actually, I think, the hardest activity for me to describe.
Yeah. And then your next one here, you have another shadowing. And in your experience name, you have shadowing and interning at Beyond Pediatric. And it's very interesting that you have this, you kind of have this split of, it's not really shadowing, it's a lot of medical assistant stuff as well. And so it's very interesting, and a good example here that I wrote of where you could potentially split this activity into two things. You could either split this into two all by itself, keeping the shadowing that you have at the top already, the surgery kind of shadowing, or you can take the shadowing out of this activity and put it into the surgery one and just kind of list both of the hours together and everything else. And then this activity could just be focused on clinical experience as a medical assistant, to really highlight that. So a good example where this one activity, one category, one experience type doesn't capture the totality of everything you were doing. So good opportunity to really remind students that you can split activities into multiple types of activities, as long as the example here is you have 200 hours for the shadowing and interning. You could split it as long as you don't say there's 200 hours for each split up. Maybe it's 100 hours of shadowing and 100 hours of medical assistant that you could split it into. So good example that I wanted to highlight there. And then we have your RA position here, which you were mentioning earlier as maybe a little bit of a distraction for doing better in school. But obviously a big part of your journey, you mark it as a most meaningful. And I really love this last sentence here about being able to celebrate their successes, comfort them during their struggles, and being a confidant to all the residents was one of the most fulfilling responsibilities of my role, right? You weren't trying to sell of like, ooh, I'm a really compassionate person, and ooh, I'm very empathetic. You told the story, you focused on what you did, you talked about why it was important to you. So good job overall with that. You have tropical ecology study. Sounds like a really big struggle here to go to the Bahamas to do some research. But a good job of not selling too much. A lot of students, when it comes to research, will try to sell of like, I'm really good at data analysis, and I'm really good at doing regression analysis, and I'm really good at using R. I'm really, right? Like, I don't care about any of that. The medical schools aren't picking students based on lab skills. And so you just talked about what you did, potentially what's important for you in the future without needing to sell those skills. So great job. So again, kind of comparing mission accepted videos to application renovation videos, the biggest difference is that sales pitch. Right? A lot of students, when it comes to the application renovation, in their activity descriptions, in their personal statements, they're selling and they're pushing skills and traits, and like, stop doing that. It's not important. I want to know who you are. All right, medical center volunteer. Again, just kind of basic information here that does the job of what you need to do. You're telling a little bit of a story of a child here. More research experience, which again is great. And then hobbies. I love having hobbies. Zumba fitness instructor. We need more Zumba classes in the world, which is great. Again, continuing down on into chemistry lab assistant. Nice little anecdote. Tutoring is one of the easiest ones, I think, where you can transition from like, as a tutor, I planned lesson plans. Like, obviously, that's what tutors do. But you gave a little anecdote of working with a student, which is wonderful. Student tour ambassador, right? Not selling skills. Very easy for students who are doing these types of tours of like, oh, through this, I was able to build my communication skills. Like, no, like that's not the point. Don't go there. So again, just a wonderful job there. This last one you have here, conferences attended, the National Academy of Future Physicians and Medical Scientists. This was in high school. Why did you choose to put this on your application?
I was definitely debating that for a while. And at the end, I chose it because it definitely pointed me towards the medical field. I think that was my first experience ever. It was during my senior year, towards the end. And it just directed me to college just to focus on medicine. So I think just having that exposure definitely helped me. So I thought it was important to my journey.
Okay. So general rule of thumb for everyone is things that happen in high school, stay in high school. They don't go on your medical school application. Things that maybe you started in high school and then continued into college and beyond potentially, those can go on your application with the start date in high school. But usually these one-off things, if it happened in high school, it doesn't go on the application. Obviously, it's not a hard and fast rule, but that's the general rule of thumb that basically any advisor will tell you. All right. Any questions, any other comments you want to make about your experiences?
Nothing that comes to mind.
All right. And then we get to your personal statement. And so your personal statement is one, again, that I think it does the job that it needs to do. It helps me understand your journey to medicine. And so you start off here with these kind of big medical terms, and what it meant to you, and being 6 and raised and adopted by your grandmother, and who she is and the roles that she's had in your life is good, right? And having this exposure and experience dealing with healthcare with family members and everyone else and trying to learn all this stuff is obviously has shaped who you are and the role that you are in your family, and given you this desire to like, I need to play a bigger role in my family and in other people's lives to help them. And so really helps the reader, helps me understand where you're coming from and why you're doing this. And the rest of it is right. It's just basic kind of helping the reader understand everything you're going through. Again, talking about shadowing, we talked about shadowing. I typically recommend not mentioning it as a most meaningful. I also typically recommend not putting it in a personal statement as a way to quote unquote water the seed, as I talk about in my book, because usually what you're doing is you're typically just talking about the doctor. The doctor did this. I saw the doctor do that. And we get to this third paragraph here, and that's basically all it is the doctor did this and the doctor did that. And then the patient came and thanked me, which is, again, another kind of thing that I say, stay away from being thanked and gratitude. But it ties together well, kind of the takeaway that you have from this about the resources not available for every community and the resources that your grandmother's fighting for. It ties together well with just your overall story, right, of kind of what led you here, going back to disadvantaged essay. It fits with your whole narrative. And so I think it works okay for you specifically because of your specific story. And then again, I have this comment that I wrote here that the essay is less about watering the seed, but it does a good job of showing what you're passionate about. And so not a standard personal statement that I would say this is a good kind of here's your seed and here's the watering of the seed, but ultimately lets me as the reader understand what you're passionate about, what's driving you, just kind of big picture. It's a lot of inequalities. It's a lot of giving back to the community. And so I can understand that. I would still like to see a little bit more of the why medicine aspect of it, but I can see so much of your passion behind it. And I was mentioning early on, I think in episode 1 of Mission Accepted for season 2, this bell curve of personal statements where at the top of the bell curve, right, we have all the super essay writers that like it's a perfect example of a personal statement. All the people at the bottom of the bell curve that's like that's an atrocious personal statement. And then the far majority of personal statements are right in the middle going, it's not amazing, it's not terrible, it does a good enough job to get you to that next stage. And that's right where you land, right? It does a good enough job to get you to that next stage so that people can continue to have conversations with you. And so that's why I really love doing these application or mission accepted videos, is having other applications on that aren't perfect, right? I think students have this big fear that an application has to be perfect to get into medical school, when ultimately it just has to be good enough. And that's right where you land, which is great. As your lights continue to go off there, you got to weave your arms around all of that. So we get to the end of your personal statement, and again, it does a good enough job. And I really like this last statement here that you have: my passion lies beyond the need of the patient to nurture the living, heal the sick, comfort the distressed, and provide hope in the face of fear. Love that statement at the end of the day. So you submit your primary application, you work on secondaries, you get your first interview invite. What was that like for you?
It was surreal, like so surreal. I got the first interview invite 3 days after I submitted my secondary. So I was like, is this even real? Like, I didn't think it would happen that quickly. But it just felt like all the hard work paid off.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Yeah. And how did you prepare for the interviews? What was that process like for you?
Well, you helped me get through the first stage with your application book. So I bought your interview book. I read that back to front. I made notes. I made sure I had examples for everything they could possibly ask, but not make it like a script, because I could sound like a robot the whole time.
Yep.
And just, it was through Zoom. And I think this year will also be through Zoom. So just practicing with lighting and elevating my laptop and just making sure I'll be as authentic as possible, since it's like first impression. Yeah.
What was it like to get that acceptance?
Like I was driving actually when I read the email. So I was like, oh my gosh, I need to stop. It was crazy. I called my parents. It was unbelievable because I was like, I'm going to go to school. Like, it's happening. It's hard to describe until you're like actually feeling it.
Yeah, definitely. And now that you're in school, I'm assuming you started school?
Yes, I'm 2 months in.
How has it been?
It, it is. It's a lot. It is. It is a lot.
Yeah.
It's sometimes it feels like you're drowning, but you have to just remember why you're here, why you fought like so long to get here.
Yeah.
But I do enjoy it at times when we do physical diagnosis and I get to whip out my stethoscope. I'm like, yes, this is.
One of my biggest pet peeves is seeing pictures, especially on like med school, like Instagram accounts of their students with the stethoscope pointing backwards in their ears. I'm like, no, your ear canals go forward. Put them forward. So if you don't know, if you're watching this, when you look at a stethoscope, the two earpieces don't go straight in to the middle. They angle forward or backward depending on how you put them on, and you want to put them on so they're angled forward. That's the way your ear canals work. But anyway, so that's awesome. I'm glad that you are enjoying medical school. You are trying not to drown, which is a very appropriate analogy. Lovely fire hose analogy that everyone talks about, and it's so hard having gone through it. It's really hard to describe it and prepare someone for what's to come. And I've kind of given up. I'm like, you're gonna figure it out.
Yeah.
It's a lot, and you'll figure out what I mean in the
People
future.
told me, and you don't know until you're just right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Exams here, there, this. It's you just don't know until you're in it.
Yeah. So you mentioned test anxiety when it came to the MCAT. How are you dealing with that in medical school?
I actually spoke to some professors. It's just really just staying calm, breathing techniques. When a question becomes overwhelming, just skip it, flag it. Don't let it carry on for the rest of the exam. Especially for biochem, read slowly, read everything because there's some things that you'll miss. I think for me, it's just like breathing techniques. It's really helpful.
Yeah. Breathing is a great method of meditation and just focusing on that breath to really calm down those nerves, which is awesome. For everyone watching, what kind of advice would you potentially go back and give yourself back in the day to let yourself know that everything will be okay or to do better in certain situations? What advice would you give yourself?
I would tell myself to just research everything, like know everything you're doing. There's so many resources out there. Like you're one of them. I found out about you like really late when I was applying. I know, right? But there's so many things out there. Just continue to keep working hard. Make sure you know everything. Don't go in like, I don't know what the correct term is. Just don't go in not knowing what you're getting into.
Yeah.
Because this is a long field. It's a dedicated field. You're giving up a lot of your time for other people, but it's worth it. If you love it, it is 100% worth it. So just keep working. Don't give up. Don't ever give up. So that's mine.